By early 1944, the Second World War had already claimed millions of lives and caused untold misery to tens of millions more. Despite that carnage, some men, a select few who thrived in combat and had earned a reputation for courage, skill and determination under fire, would rise to prominence. At the very top of that list stood one man, who lived a life so unbelievable that it could have been written for Hollywood. In fact, it was so unbelievable that it was written for Hollywood, with the hero of the movie being the man himself. In this video, using eyewitness testimony, on-the-ground footage and official military records, we explore the incredible wartime accomplishments, life and tragic demise of perhaps the greatest soldier in the history of modern warfare. This is the story of Audie Murphy. The life of that extraordinary man started in distinctly ordinary circumstances. Born in rural Texas in 1925 to a dirt-poor farming family, Audie, the seventh of 12 children, who was remarkable only for being a particularly small boy, had been raised the hard way. When his frequently absent father finally left the family for good, young Audie was forced to drop out of school to take a job picking cotton for $1 a day to help put food on the table. When his mother passed away in 1941, 16-year-old Audie was left to fend for himself, and a few months later, with the bombing of Pearl Harbor, he saw his opportunity. Attempting and failing to enlist with the Army, Navy and Marines, the underweight, underheight and underage teenager was not put off. Eventually, in June 1942, he was accepted into the US Army, with his medical examination on enlistment recording that he was just 5 feet 5 inches tall, weighing 112 pounds and of slender build. His stature, combined with his boyish looks, earned him the nickname of Baby during his training. But as we'll see, what Audie lacked in physical presence he more than made up for in courage and skill. Landing in North Africa in February 1943, he joined Company B, 15th Infantry Regiment of the US 3rd Infantry Division, the Rock of the Marne, and quickly came to the notice of his superiors as a quick-thinking soldier and a crack shot. In July, PFC Murphy first went into action, landing here at Licata in Sicily, beginning a period of frontline combat which wouldn't end until May 1945. Constantly searching for action, he was promoted to corporal by late July and was with US forces when they landed here at Salerno, where he single-handedly charged and knocked out a German machine gun nest which had pinned down his platoon. By December he was a sergeant, and the following month found himself right here in the Anzio bridgehead. Let's take a look. That landing, an attempt to outflank Monte Cassino and the vaunted Gustav line, had turned out to be something of a debacle for the men of 3ID on the ground. Unable to make inland progress and trapped in this small beachhead, they had endured ferocious counterattacks by German forces intent on driving them into the sea. Despite having been recently hospitalised suffering with a bout of malaria, Audie, now a staff sergeant, as was his way, was never one to stay behind the lines for long, and was soon back in the line, shelled day and night as they defended here along the Mussolini Canal. On the 2nd of March, he and the men of Company B, 15th Infantry Regiment found themselves facing the last concerted German counterattack on the Anzio bridgehead. From his observation post in a ruined cottage, some 20 German tanks were spotted advancing towards their lines. Calling in an artillery barrage and adjusting the gunner's fall of shot, the lead tank was disabled but not destroyed, with Murphy himself hitting several of the bailing out crew as the other tanks withdrew. Sure that the enemy would attempt to recover the Mark IV during the night to put it back into action, he led a patrol out in darkness to finish it off. First Lieutenant William Edmondson of the 15th Infantry's Company C witnessed the events. On the 2nd of March 1944, Company B, 15th Infantry occupied positions about 1,000 yards from a road known as Tree-Lined Road on the Anzio beachhead, Italy. An 8-man patrol under the leadership of Lieutenant, then Sergeant Audie L. Murphy, Company B, 15th Infantry, was sent out to investigate possible enemy strongpoints some 800 yards to our northwest, or left front. I was at an outpost at the time, and the night, being moonlit, permitted me to see the manner of movement engaged in by the patrol at the outset of its mission. Lieutenant Murphy moved out ahead, about 50 yards, reconnoitring the ground he covered, and then he would signal for the patrol to move up to him. He kept repeating this process until he and his patrol were swallowed up by the night and lost from my view. About 800 yards to our left front, Lieutenant Murphy heard some Germans working on a partly disabled tank. He placed his men in position and then had them fire upon the area of the tank. This drew return fire from the crew working on the tank for protecting enemy riflemen. As his patrol kept up its fire, Lieutenant Murphy crept up about 100 yards closer to the tank until he got to within about 50 yards of it. Then he fired rifle grenades at it, completely destroying it. At this time, the enemy opened up with terrific machine gun fire coming from innumerable machine guns on tree-lined road. Lieutenant Murphy calmly crawled back to his patrol and led them safely through an area crisscrossed by tracer bullets back to the company's CP. His bravery and coolness completely destroyed the enemy tank beyond hopes of repair, and his patrol returned with mission accomplished. For his actions that night, Audie would earn the Bronze Star with Valor Device, the first of an extraordinary number of medals for gallantry. Just 10 days later, Murphy was again hit by malaria, something that would plague him throughout the war. But always wanting to be back with his men, he was soon back at the front and involved in repeated heavy fighting as the 3rd Division advanced on and eventually in early June captured Rome. At exactly the same time as those first troops entered the Italian capital, a massive armada was steaming across the English Channel, destination Normandy. Over the coming weeks, that great invasion would draw more and more German troops to the region, which in turn opened the door for another invasion, one much less publicised, but for the men on the ground in the leading waves, including Staff Sergeant Murphy, just as deadly. Operation Dragoon. Tabled for August 1944, the strategic plan was relatively simple. Land a further invasion force here in the picturesque French Riviera, break through the German defences and drive up through the heart of France to link up with Allied forces breaking out of Normandy, trapping tens of thousands of isolated German troops in the process. And so, on the 12th of August 1944, Murphy bid farewell to Italy for the last time and began a 5-month period of action that would take him from a highly respected NCO to one of the most highly decorated officers in the history of the United States Army. That all started right here in the area between Saint-Tropez and Cavalaire, in an area designated Yellow Beach. Coming ashore under an enormous naval and aerial bombardment, the assault waves of the leading battalions, captured on film in this remarkable footage, at first met little resistance. All that changed as the leading troops, including Murphy's Company B of the 15th Infantry, pressed inland. Approaching a line of pine trees, which opened to a vineyard and a steep hill beyond, the distinctive sound of German machine guns ripped out as Murphy's platoon came under a withering fire. Seeing them pinned down, he alone ran back to the tree line to his rear, where he found a light machine gun before returning to engage the position in a close-range duel of automatic fire. Alongside his best friend Latty Tipton, the pair went on to shoot down 2 nearby Germans before Tipton himself, apparently rising at the sight of a white flag from the main German line, was shot and killed by Murphy's side. Enraged at the death of his friend, Murphy would single-handedly charge forwards. What happened that day is best told through the official citation found in Murphy's personnel file. Leaving his men in a covered position, he dashed 40 yards through withering fire to a draw. Using this defiladed route, he went back toward the beaches, found a light machine gun squad, and returning up the rocky hill, placed the machine gun in a position 75 yards in advance of his platoon. In the duel which ensued, Lieutenant Murphy silenced the enemy weapon, killed 2 of its crew and wounded a 3rd. As he proceeded further up the draw, 2 Germans advanced towards him. Quickly destroying both of them, he dashed up the draw alone toward the enemy strongpoint, disregarding bullets which glanced off the rocks around him and grenades which exploded 15 yards away. Closing in, he wounded 2 Germans with carbine fire, killed 2 more in a fierce, brief firefight, and forced the remaining 5 to surrender. His extraordinary heroism resulted in the capture of a fiercely contested enemy hill and the annihilation or capture of the entire enemy garrison. Entered military service from Farmersville, Texas. In just 2 hours that firefight was over, and though Murphy would rightly be awarded the Distinguished Service Cross, his only concern at that time was the death of his friend, of whom he later said, "I won the medal, but Latty, who was the bravest man I ever knew, won only death for himself." This incident seems in a way to have changed Murphy, who by August was the only surviving original member of Company B from when he had joined it back in February 1943. From this time on, he was always in the lead, always courting danger, and was constantly volunteering for the most dangerous of duties. And for that, he didn't have long to wait. It was, though, somewhat ironic that the first time Audie was wounded came not in frontline combat, but some way behind the lines. On his way back to headquarters on the 15th September, as he passed a newly arrived group of replacements, a sudden explosion rang out as a German mortar bomb exploded nearby. Audie himself described the moments that followed. When I came to, I'm sitting beside a crater with a broken carbine in my hands. My head aches, my eyes burn, and I cannot hear. The acrid, greasy taste of burnt powder fills my mouth. He was lucky, receiving only a few bomb splinters in his left ankle and heel. The two men next to him were not, both being killed outright in the blast. Unsurprisingly, Murphy would refuse to be evacuated and rejoined his unit in their push through the Vosges Mountains against increasingly determined opposition. It was in this area that Audie would once again distinguish himself, not once, but twice. By the end of September, the men of the 3rd Division found themselves just here, having crossed the Moselle River as they continued northwards up this feature known as the Cléry Valley. As a key route of advance, and something of a natural bottleneck, the withdrawing Germans had decided to make a stand. Using a series of stone quarries as defensive positions either side of the main road to the village of Le Taulier, they had turned the entire area into a formidable fortification. For the advancing two regiments, the 30th and Murphy's 15th, their plan was to attack northwards up either side of the valley, knocking out these strong points as they did so, thus opening the main road for their supporting armour to move up. It was a daunting prospect over terrain that was difficult to cross at all, let alone in a firefight. But crossed it had to be. Foremost amongst those defences was L'Homet, sometimes called Cléry, a large old stone quarry and tunnel complex just here on the 15th Regiment's line of advance, which had been turned into a labyrinth of defensive positions, manned by some 200 grenadiers and bristling with machine guns. On the 30th of September the attack began as troops cautiously approached the quarry through the tree line. I'll give you one guess who was leading that advance, but you won't need it. Over 2 days of nerve-shattering action, the Americans inched their way forwards along this hillside in an attempt to force the enemy out. But well concealed in the undergrowth and with plenty of ammunition, each time they were driven back, suffering heavy losses along the way. As his exhausted platoon were resting on the evening of the 1st of October, Murphy was surprised to receive a visit by none other than Colonel Paulick, his battalion commander. Frustrated at the slow progress, he and several other officers decided to personally reconnoitre the route ahead to understand what was causing the hold-up. And so, on the morning of the 2nd of October, Paulick, his XO, and Company B's commander, along with Murphy and a patrol of 4 enlisted men, set out towards the German lines. Let's hear from a report written by Paulick himself. On the 2nd of October 1944, near the Cléry Quarry, France, I and 2 other officers, and 2nd Lieutenant, then Staff Sergeant, Audie L. Murphy, 01692-509, Company B, 15th Infantry, reconnoitred forward areas. It was about 1000 hours, the weather and observation were clear, and we manoeuvred over the rocky, mountainous terrain to endeavour to discover enemy strongpoints. Because of the rugged formation of terrain, it was extremely difficult to spot enemy positions which might be hidden anywhere. Suddenly a Kraut machine gun opened up on us. It was no more than 25 yards from us and at first could not be noticed in the dense underbrush. Initially the enemy surprised us. We hit the dirt, taking scant cover behind trees, and fired back at the gun. The German gunners had a fight on their hands now, but because of their firepower we could not get closer to them. There were 7 Kraut on that gun position. Suddenly Lieutenant Murphy shouted to us to stay down. He himself stood up after he had inched his way to within 15 yards of the machine gun and became a conspicuous target to the enemy. One long burst of machine gun fire was directed at Lieutenant Murphy, but somehow managed to miraculously miss him by the barest of margins. Lieutenant Murphy flung 2 hand grenades into the German machine gun nest with effective accuracy. 4 Germans were killed, 3 wounded, and the gun position obliterated. Lieutenant Murphy carried the gun back with him. Lieutenant Murphy's coolness under fire and his courage nullified the effect of the enemy's initial advantage of surprise, accounted for an enemy machine gun, 4 dead Germans and 3 prisoners. With great skill and coolness, Murphy had yet again proved his worth, and for his performance both throughout the advance and on the 2nd would earn the Silver Star and Legion of Merit. Ordinary mortals might by now feel that they'd ridden their luck far enough, but Audi was far from ordinary. Just 4 days later he was again in action as the 15th continued their drive to clear the remaining Germans from the quarry. This record in his personnel file tells the story. Audi L. Murphy, 01692509, 2nd Lieutenant, then Staff Sergeant, Company B, 15th Infantry, for gallantry in action. On the afternoon of the 5th of October 1944 near Le Touilly, France, Audi Murphy, carrying an SCR 536 radio, crawled 50 yards under severe enemy machine gun and rifle fire to a point 200 yards from a strongly entrenched enemy who had prevented further advance. Despite machine gun and rifle bullets that hit as close as a foot to him, Lieutenant Murphy directed artillery fire upon enemy positions for an hour, killing 15 Germans and inflicting approximately 35 additional casualties. His courage, audacity and accuracy enabled his company to advance and attain its objective. Residence, Greenville, Texas. In the space of just 5 days, in this unassuming valley in northeastern France, Staff Sergeant Audi Murphy had earned no less than 2 Silver Stars, an almost unheard of achievement. Of this second event, Murphy would later tell a newspaper reporter that he was cold, wet and scared, and his teeth chattered so loud he was afraid he'd give himself away. So maybe he was mortal after all. Now's a good time to just pause the action for a second for a word about today's sponsor, without whom we simply couldn't make videos like this. And to be fair, it's a company we love working with. Vail Watches. They're not only a US based quality watchmaker, but like us, they love history. This is best summed up in this watch right here, based on the famed World War II Dirty Dozen. For those who don't know, in the Second World War the British military contracted a dozen companies to design a hard-wearing field watch to the highest specifications. And in homage to the most famous military field watch of all time, they have created their own Dirty Dozen timepiece. And honestly, it's a stunning watch. Available in 36 and 40mm, I've got the 40mm automatic version with the nylon strap, and it's been a fantastic daily wear. It's compact, durable, waterproof, easily legible and affordable, and let's be fair, it looks great. If you'd like to support Vair and us, take a moment to check out their excellent range with the link in the description, which also includes the 40mm C5 Black Solar Field Watch that our editor Shane loves so much. So huge thanks to Vair, and of course you for your continued support. So, back to the action. The fighting in the Vosges Mountains had cost the 15th dearly, with hundreds of men, especially officers, becoming casualties. As a result, a number of the remaining senior NCOs were put forward for a coveted battlefield commission. No one argued when Audi's name was mentioned. Except him. Murphy categorically refused to be placed on the list for a commission. As a poor farm worker from Texas with little education who was embarrassed at his struggles to read and write, he didn't feel that he was up to the job, especially the paperwork that came with it. Fortunately, Colonel Paulick didn't take no for an answer. Audi was simply too valuable. Instead, he told Murphy not to worry about the paperwork, his adjutant would take care of that, and he simply ordered him to accept the commission. And so, on the 14th of October 1944, Staff Sergeant Audi Leon Murphy was discharged from the army and re-engaged that same day as 2nd Lieutenant Murphy, Company B, 1st Battalion, 15th Infantry Regiment. Incredibly, he was still only 20 years of age. The advance went on. Day after day the Americans pushed on, clearing villages, houses and hamlets in the now snow-covered Vosges Mountains, more often than not taking casualties to lone snipers and isolated machine guns as they did so. By the 26th, Company B found themselves here near the picturesque hamlet of Le Rougeau, the Red Water, when finally Murph's luck ran out. Advancing cautiously along a forest track in this tree line to clear out the last enemy resistance, a single shot rang out. Spinning round, Murphy saw his radio operator lying directly behind him, killed by a sniper's bullet. In that split second he dived for cover at the same time as a second round, ricocheting off a tree, smashed into his right hip and buttock. Lying on the track, just 30 yards from the enemy sniper, he watched on as inexplicably his opponent put a further bullet through Audi's helmet, which had rolled from his head. In Murphy's own words, it was his last mistake. Despite the pain, he raised his carbine and fired back, hitting the sniper between the eyes. Moments later, men were surrounding the badly wounded lieutenant, who it seemed had finally received the wound that would end his war. Carried back in an agonising journey to the rear, he would eventually be taken by ambulance away from the Vosges to the town of Arles, where he would spend the next 2 months recovering from his wound. That recovery was actually far from straightforward. Within days he had developed a raging fever and gangrene which threatened not only to end his war, but also his life. Eventually, with the help of the new miracle drug penicillin and numerous operations which removed more than 5 pounds of gangrenous flesh, leaving a 9-inch scar across his buttock, he began to improve. By early January, still in pain, and to considerable surprise, Murphy once again rejoined his unit in the line, who at that time found themselves embroiled in the bitter fighting around an area known as the Colmar Pocket. The 15th had been in action over the previous days to clear the Germans from the area, and it had, as always, proved costly, with Company B's strength reduced from 100 to just 40 men. Little did they know, but the exhausted veterans of the 15th were directly in the path of an oncoming German attack. Records tell us that the company was holding a position just outside the village of Holzwihr by the end of January. But where exactly is the battle site today? In the years after the war, the precise location was lost, though Murphy himself wrote this description which serves as a useful guide. We're at the butt end of a rough U-shape whose sides are formed by finger-like extensions of the wood stretching towards Holzwihr. Directly before us are flat open fields, beyond which I can see a church steeple and housetops in the village, a mile away. The narrow road over which we've been pounding our feet leads from the woods to the town. With this information, and the use of modern technology, we can clearly identify Murphy's U-shaped woods, the road from the wood to the town, and then the village itself. So it was here, along this tree line, that Murphy and his 40 men were located. Their chief armoured support came in the form of 2 M10 tank destroyers, one of which was stationed on the road running from the woods through to Holzwihr, with the second some 40 yards ahead of the main line just here. Murphy himself had selected a spot in the drainage ditch along the main road through the forest about 10 yards ahead of the rear tank destroyer as his CP, armed only with his trusty M1 carbine, a pair of binoculars, map and field telephone. This location was made more uncomfortable for the men of Company B by several factors. First, the ground was so frozen that it was next to impossible to dig in, and the men had to continually move around to prevent their feet from freezing. And secondly, that the main US support was around a mile in their rear and awaiting for the arrival of fresh troops before moving up to reinforce the line. With Germans retaining hold of the northern end of Holzwihr village some 400 yards away, these fields formed the de facto no man's land. Murphy was of course well aware of how precarious a situation this would be were the Germans to launch an attack, and so he ordered his men to prepare a second defensive line several hundred yards further into the woods where better protection could be found. What Murphy had most feared came true at 2 p.m. on the 26th of January when the rumble of engines could be heard in Holzwihr, a sound which was accompanied a few moments later by the sight of no less than 6 formidable Jagdpanther tank destroyers emerging from the mist-shrouded village towards them. To make things worse, the German arm was immediately followed by some 250 infantrymen, camouflaged in white against the snow, advancing in skirmish order under the protection of a heavy artillery bombardment. Seeing the danger, and knowing that his understrength company possessed nothing capable of stopping all that armour, besides perhaps the Wolverine tank destroyers, he called to his men to prepare to withdraw, at the same time using his field telephone to call in artillery fire on the approaching enemy. The situation got worse very quickly when the rear Wolverine was struck by enemy fire, killing the commander and gunner. It began billowing smoke, with surviving crew abandoning it and running for the rear under heavy fire. The second Wolverine, in a more exposed position, did well, firing continuously as it attempted to back into the safety of the tree line. Murphy recalled though the disheartening sight of seeing the M10 shells striking the frontal armour of the Jagdpanthers before ricocheting off, causing no damage. The situation changed drastically moments later when the remaining M10 left the roadway as it reversed and slid into the drainage ditch, becoming stuck with its main gun at an angle which made it useless for defence. With no way of extracting it, Sergeant Hines and his crew bailed out, leaving Company B alone to face the onslaught. Murphy, knowing his men had a better chance in their stronger line within the wood, called for his company to retire, whilst he continued, alone, to call in fire to cover their withdrawal. Company B's platoon sergeant Elmer Brawley described the scene. As we withdrew, hundreds of infantrymen poured out of the woods, firing automatic weapons as they came. Lieutenant Murphy stayed on at his CP under a pine tree on the edge of the woods and directed artillery fire by telephone upon the advancing tanks and infantrymen. The enemy tanks crashed through on both our flanks, firing persistently at the lieutenant and shattering branches of trees at his side with shell fragments. In a storm of machine gun fire from the tanks, he coolly went on, telephoning fire orders. With only one target visible on the field now for the German attackers, Murphy came under a continuous hail of fire, but amazingly, he stayed, firing his carbine until all his ammunition was exhausted, then moving the 10 yards to his rear to take cover behind the burning tank destroyer. This was a hugely dangerous place to be, as not only was it right in the heart of the German advance, but it was also in immediate danger of its own ammunition or fuel exploding. Lieutenant Weisfenning, an artillery forward observer who had relocated to Company B's line once his communications were knocked out, recalled what happened next. The Kraut infantry line, consisting of 2 full-strength companies of 125 men each, surged across the open meadow in a wide arc. As they advanced, they fired their machine pistols and rifles at Lieutenant Murphy. Then I saw Lieutenant Murphy do the bravest thing that I've ever seen any man do in combat. With the Germans only 100 yards away and still moving up on him, he climbed onto the slowly burning tank destroyer and began firing the 50 caliber machine gun at the Krauts. There he was, completely exposed and silhouetted against the background of bare trees and snow, and a fire under him that threatened to blow the destroyer to bits, and 88mm shells, machine gun, machine pistol and rifle fire crashing all around him. Here Murphy stayed, raining a shower of 50 cal rounds into the oncoming German infantry, killing and wounding many, and driving the others to ground. He was aided too by fortune. Fearing either the imminent explosion of the tank destroyer, or possibly that it might still be crewed, the German armour steered clear, and partially concealed by the smoke it was emitting, Murphy remained somewhat hidden. For the next 30 or so minutes, Audi held off all German attempts to move towards his position, alternating between firing and calling in artillery strikes on enemy troops, all the time standing on something which was likely to explode at any moment. In classic Murphy fashion, he would later write, "I am conscious only that the smoke and the turret afford a good screen, and that, for the first time in 3 days, my feet are warm." Unable to advance deep into the woods, and dissuaded by the occasional bazooka round and Murphy's fire, the German armour paused in the fields and awaited for the infantry to come forward to clear the way. From the German perspective, the devastating 50 cal fire was now the major obstacle, and all attention switched to that, with units creeping up under fire to try and identify and outflank the position. On 2 occasions, German tank rounds slammed into Murphy's M10, engulfing it in clouds of smoke. Both times, miraculously, he reappeared and carried on firing. Based in this exact location, Murphy had to simultaneously fire, call in orders, avoid German artillery and tank rounds, and keep an eye out on his exposed flanks. Luckily, he managed it, as peering through the smoke of the burning Wolverine a few moments later, he caught sight of movement just a few yards away. Swinging the 50 cal round in the nick of time, he spotted a group of 12 German soldiers in the act of getting out of the ditch to rush his position and surely kill him, when he opened up on the group from a distance of just 10 yards, killing them to a man. That immediate threat was gone, but things were still desperate for Murphy, who once again called back for artillery support. On the other end of the line was a radio operator, who, when asking, "How close are they?" received the legendary reply, "Just hold the phone and I'll let you talk to one of the bastards." If it wasn't already clear just how perilous the situation was, Murphy's next coordinates for the artillery to fire on were his own position. In a few moments, US shrapnel was mixing with German steel as it buzzed and clanged off the burning tank destroyer in a desperate attempt to halt the enemy attack. Audi's luck held. Now drenched in blood from that sniper's wound which had reopened, he fought on, hammering the hard-pressed Germans who finally, after more than an hour fighting against one man, began to falter. Here's PFC Abramski, who was watching on from the Company B lines. For an hour he held off the enemy force single-handed, fighting against impossible odds. When his last round of ammunition was spent, Lieutenant Murphy climbed painfully down from the top of the tank destroyer and made his way back to our position. Although his wound looked really bad, he refused to wait for treatment. He reorganised the company and led us in an attack which swept the German force back into the woods they had come from. After he had done that, he stopped for first aid right on the field, but he wouldn't take evacuation. The fight that Lieutenant Murphy put up was the greatest display of guts and courage I've ever seen. There was only 1 in a million who would be willing to stand up on a burning vehicle loaded up with explosives and hold off 250 Krauts for an hour, and to do all that when he was wounded. He must have killed and wounded about 100 of them with directed artillery and 50 caliber fire. Murphy himself recalled that shortly after climbing down from the N10 and making his way rearward, all the while under fire and suffering a further wound in the right ankle, he heard the ammunition blow on the tank destroyer, no doubt killing him if he'd remained in the vicinity just a couple of minutes longer. It's no underestimation to say that Murphy's actions, aided of course by those of the artillery, were responsible for halting the German attack, and according to his commanding officer, from the remnants of Company B being surrounded and entirely destroyed. Today, on the spot of that action, stands this memorial to Ordy and all the men of the 3rd Infantry Division who fought and fell in the liberation of France. In the following days, reports of Ordy's bravery flooded in, and unsurprisingly, he was recommended for and rightly received the highest award for gallantry available to US servicemen, the Medal of Honor, which was presented to him on the 2nd of June 1945 near Salzburg, Austria. On that day, Murphy was to receive several of his awards, including the Legion of Merit, presented by Lieutenant General Alexander Patch, who reportedly whispered to the equally shy Murphy, "I wonder if you're as nervous as I am." Murphy's reply, "Yes sir, I'm afraid I am." First Lieutenant Ordy Leon Murphy eventually returns to the US in August 1945, just a few days before his 21st birthday, being released from active duty the following month. He eventually accepted an appointment as captain in the National Guard in July 1950 and was recommended for major, but not having sufficient academic qualifications to hold the rank, a special board had to be convened to adjudicate the case. The following is from a memo sent to the Chief of the National Guard. A review of Captain Murphy's records showed that he was awarded the Medal of Honor, Distinguished Service Cross, Silver Star with Oak Leaf Cluster, Legion of Merit, Bronze Star Medal with V device and Oak Leaf Cluster, Purple Heart with 2nd Oak Leaf Cluster, American Campaign Medal, European African Middle Eastern Campaign Medal with 1 Silver Service Star, 3 Bronze Stars and 1 Bronze Arrowhead, World War II Victory Medal, Combat Infantryman Badge, Marksman Badge with Rifle, Expert Badge with Bayonet Bar, French Foragière in the colours of the Croix de Guerre, French Légion d'Honneur, grade of Chevalier, French Croix de Guerre with Silver Star, and the Belgian Croix de Guerre with Palm. After careful consideration, it was decided that Murphy, the most decorated American soldier of the Second World War, probably did have the necessary qualifications, and the promotion to major was confirmed. Upon returning to the States and semi-civilian life after the war, Murphy was a national celebrity, and offers soon came flooding in, which resulted in him embarking on an acting career of more than 40 feature films, including many westerns. Perhaps his most famous role, though, was as himself in the 1955 film To Hell and Back, based on his own autobiography, a film he didn't like. But despite considerable on-screen success, Ordy's life was troubled off it. He was haunted by memories of his wartime experiences, had profound struggles with PTSD, and reportedly slept for the remainder of his life with a pistol under his pillow. Lost for purpose in a peacetime world, a physical wreck from his wartime service, and thrust into the Hollywood limelight that he never really enjoyed, he struggled with depression, scrapes with the law, and a severe gambling addiction which he would never overcome. Ordy was perhaps most at ease, though, when in the company of fellow veterans, men who'd shared the dangers, the highs and the lows of warfare. Although he wasn't active in veterans associations as such, he did do significant work to support fellow servicemen. On one Veterans Day in the 1950s, Ordy was asked in an interview what the most memorable day of the war was for him. This is his powerful response.
I think I was first lieutenant, and this was, I've even forgotten the date, but I was on a train going for a little rest on the Riviera for, about 3 or 4 day pass. And I heard the announcement that the war in Europe was over. And there's nothing that could top that for me.
Well, then this was your most memorable day.
It certainly was, because, as I say, those 3 years had seemed much longer than they really were, and I saw a lot of good men come and go. And a lot of them, as we know, especially and remember on this day, are still there.
Whilst Ordy had, according to the title of his autobiography, been to hell, just perhaps he never truly came back. On the 28th of May 1971, Audie Murphy and 5 others took off from DeKalb Airport in Atlanta, Georgia, on board a twin-engine Aero Commander en route for Martinsville, Virginia. It never arrived. It later emerged that the aircraft, lost in fog, had struck this mountain range, killing all 6 on board. Audie Leon Murphy was just 45 years of age when he died. He was buried with full military honours at Arlington National Cemetery on Monday the 7th of June 1971. At Audie's earlier request, the gold lettering, reserved exclusively for Medal of Honor recipients, was omitted from his headstone, he preferring the plain inscription of an ordinary soldier. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video and, like us, find the detail of historical events and individuals endlessly fascinating, why not check out our full-length virtual battlefield tours right here on YouTube. Available exclusively to our member audience, we have an entire range of in-depth deep dives into some of the most influential battles in military history. Led by expert historians and offering a level of detail that we simply can't include here in a normal documentary, they really do provide a unique insight into tactics, strategy, the people and places involved. To find out more, check out our member section on YouTube or our Patreon link below and help support us to make more free content just like this. That's all this time. We'll see you again soon.